People talk about childhood like it's this warm, nostalgic haze. Bike rides, summer storms, the glow of a TV left on too late. But when I think back to being 14, I always land on one night in Briar Hill Ridge, a night that scraped something out of me I never got back. My parents were away at a company retreat that weekend, a rare overnight trip. I had begged them to let me stay home alone. I wasn't a rebellious kid, just a stubborn one who wanted a taste of independence. They agreed on the condition that every door stayed locked and I answered their calls every hour. I kept my end of the deal. At first, I ordered takeout around 6 p.m., running downstairs barefoot with a controller in one hand. The delivery guy handed me the bag, made some awkward small talk about the weather, and left. Excited to get back to my game, I shut the door with my elbow and rushed upstairs without checking the lock. That mistake still echoes in my memory, like the click of a safety being switched off. By 9 p.m., the house was dark except for the glow of my monitor. Rain tapped faintly against the siding. I was mid-match, headset on, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of my front door opening. Slowly, quietly, like someone trying not to be heard. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The house was old, always settling, always creaking. But then came footsteps, heavy ones, measured, pressing down on the wooden entryway with deliberate weight. I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard. My heartbeat drowned out the game's audio. Someone was in my house. I yanked off my headset, every muscle in my body vibrating. I wanted to move, to hide, to do anything, but fear pinned me like a nail. The footsteps drifted through the living room, stopping between pauses like the intruder was studying the layout. Then they started up the stairs, one slow step at a time. Creak, creak, creak. And that was the moment I realized I had never locked the front door. My bedroom door was cracked open barely an inch, just enough for me to see the hallway carpet and the faint glow of the nightlight I kept plugged in outside my room. As the footsteps climbed, that small sliver of space became my entire world. I held my breath until my lungs ached. The only thing louder than the intruder's steps was the thud, thud, thud inside my chest. They reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I watched a long shadow stretch across the hallway floor, bending toward my door like a hand reaching for me. The figure stood just out of view, silent, listening. I swear I could feel him, like the air itself tightened. My phone was on my desk, too far to grab without making noise. My parents were miles away. The closest neighbor was 3 houses down. I'd never felt so small. After what felt like forever, the figure took a few steps forward. That was when I saw him, just a silhouette, tall, thin, wearing something dark. He paused directly in front of my room. I could see the outline of his shoulders rise and fall, as if he were breathing deep, steady breaths. He didn't try the door. He didn't speak. He just listened. I clapped a hand over my mouth to smother a gasp. I didn't dare blink. Then, without warning, he turned. He walked back down the hall, still slow, still deliberate, descended the stairs, and moved through the house with the same eerie calmness he'd entered with. A moment later, the front door clicked shut. Quietly, politely, like he hadn't just shattered my childhood in 20 minutes. I stayed in my room for almost an hour, shaking so hard I could barely stand. When I finally crawled to the window, I saw nothing outside. No car, no movement, no sign he'd ever been there at all. But he had been, and he knew I lived there. When my parents got home the next morning, I didn't even wait for them to walk through the door. I ran straight into them, shaking, crying so hard I could barely breathe. They called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived, looked around, and confirmed what I already knew. No forced entry, no broken windows, nothing stolen. Which meant what happened wasn't a robbery. It was something worse. It's possible he thought the house was empty, one officer said. People check doors occasionally. You may have scared him off by being home. But I knew better. He hadn't run. He hadn't panicked. He moved through the rooms like he was mapping them out. Like he was preparing. My mom called it a misunderstanding. My dad promised they'd install better locks. The police suggested leaving lights on. None of it made me feel better. For weeks, I slept with the lamp on. I kept my door locked. I flinched every time a floorboard groaned. I refused to be home alone. Not after dark, not even for 5 minutes. But the worst part was the question gnawing at me every night. Why didn't he come into my room? He could have. He was right there. Nothing stopped him. Sometimes I wondered if he was waiting for something. That night wasn't meant for anything violent. Maybe he just wanted to know the layout to see who lived there, to check for alarms. Maybe he planned to come back. That fear followed me like a second shadow. A month later, strange stories began circulating around Briar Hill Ridge. Mrs. Holloway, the elderly widow down the street, reported seeing a man standing in her backyard around midnight, motionless, facing her kitchen window. The Petersons' doorbell camera caught someone walking up to their porch at 3 a.m., turning the doorknob, then walking calmly away. 2 teenagers said they'd heard footsteps in their detached garage. Every story sounded like mine. Quiet, careful, deliberate. But no one else had seen the figure inside their home. Only me. I kept thinking about the way he walked up the stairs, the confidence, the patience. He wasn't scared of being caught. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't stealing. He was observing. Whenever I mentioned this to my parents, they'd exchange nervous looks, insisting it was all in my head. People scare themselves after something traumatic, my mom said. You're safe now. But I never felt safe again in that house. Not after the night someone stood outside my bedroom, breathing in the dark. By spring, the neighborhood incidents stopped. The police never found anyone. Life slowly returned to something that resembled normal. But I didn't. Even at 14, I understood that the world could shift in one quiet moment. Safety wasn't permanent. Locks weren't guarantees. And danger didn't always announce itself with shattered glass. It could enter through a door you forgot to secure. Years later, when I left Briar Hill Ridge for college, I still checked every lock 3 times. I slept with a heavy flashlight by my bed. I kept my phone within reach. Some nights, especially when I'm overtired, I swear I hear those footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, climbing toward me. I wake with the same cold sweat I felt at 14. The intruder never returned, at least not to my knowledge. But sometimes I wonder if that was the plan all along, to walk the house once, learn the layout, count the bedrooms, confirm the occupants, and wait for a night when things were even quieter. A night when no teenager was accidentally awake upstairs. And to this day, I don't know what stopped him from opening my door. But I've never forgotten that he didn't knock. He didn't break in. He simply walked in. Because I left the door unlocked. I never thought a town this small could swallow someone so easily. But Harborview did just that. After relocating for work, well, more like scraping together enough for rent near the coast, I realized that quaint seaside charm often hides empty wallets and overcharged apartments. That's when I found the boarding house on Seabreeze Lane. The faded white clapboard structure looked like something out of a sepia photograph, with windows that had seen decades of salty winds and a porch that sagged slightly under the weight of history. The ad promised cheap rent, and when I called, Mrs. Rennick answered. Her voice was soft, lilting, like she'd been trained to soothe children and grown-ups alike. "I just like having young people around," she said. "It keeps the house alive." I moved in the next week. At first, the place was exactly as she described. Cozy, warm in a brittle sort of way, and smelling faintly of salt and wood polish. The floors creaked underfoot. and the curtains swayed gently, as if breathing with the ocean breeze. But within days, I noticed odd things. My door, which I was certain I'd locked, would sometimes be ajar. My toiletries moved just enough to make me question my own memory. And Mrs. Rennick, well, she seemed to appear in the hallway at odd hours, always quietly observing, always smiling. She brought me tea each night, a calming herbal blend she called sleep tea. I refused politely, saying I preferred water, but she insisted. "It helps," she said softly, "and it's better for a young mind to rest fully. Don't you want to be at your best?" Her questions started small, what time I woke, what I ate, but escalated. She asked if anyone checked on me, if I had family nearby, who I called when I felt alone. I told myself she was lonely, that perhaps she'd lost someone dear and just wanted company. But the sense of being watched began gnawing at me. One night, I woke to a faint electrical hum coming from behind the wall just above my bed. Curious, I pried at the wallpaper. Beneath it, I found a small circular opening, with wires disappearing downward into the darkness. My stomach turned cold. Someone had been listening, and it wasn't the first time. The hum persisted, low and insistent, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. Over the next few nights, I began hearing footsteps beneath my room. They weren't the random creaks of an old house. They were deliberate, slow, and careful, as if someone was positioning themselves directly below me before stopping for long stretches of time. I confronted Mrs. Rennick one evening, my voice tight with unease. "Mrs. Rennick, are you in the crawl space?" She smiled that soft, gentle smile, the kind that made you doubt your own fears. "Oh, Jonas, the house has old bones that shift at night. It's nothing to worry about." I didn't believe her. I started staying up late, listening, straining to catch the faint noises. Sometimes I would catch shadows moving beneath the floorboards, or hear faint clicks that sounded mechanical, like switches being toggled. When she was out one afternoon, I decided to investigate the basement. The staircase was narrow and steep, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight from the small window at the bottom. Behind an old storage door, I found a bank of dusty monitors. My breath caught. Each screen displayed a different room in the house, all live feeds. I saw tenants' rooms, their routines, and then months of recorded footage. Tenants who had long since moved out were on those monitors. People Mrs. Rennick insisted never lived here. I stumbled back up the stairs, my heart hammering. That's when I noticed my door was already open. And there she was, standing there with a folder in her hands, my name written neatly on the tab. "You've been curious," she said, her voice as calm and melodic as ever. "Curiosity is natural, but the house keeps its order best when everyone follows its routines." I backed toward the hall, panic rising. "Curates compliance?" I managed, my voice shaking. She tilted her head slightly, eyes soft but intent. "Yes, Jonas. Tenants stay safest when they follow the rules. It's simply a matter of harmony." I realized then that she had been watching me from day one. My routines, my movements, even the nights I stayed up late. She knew them all. "I want to leave," I said, voice trembling. She smiled. "The front door locks automatically at night. The others never learned to listen either. But you have the potential to learn." My pulse raced. I backed into my room, trying the door. It was already locked from the outside. She stepped closer, the folder in her hand like a quiet threat. She spoke softly, almost as if she were sharing a secret. "It's easier when you understand the house. No one needs to be hurt." I realized that escape meant deception. I had to outthink her, to act calmly while panic clawed at my chest. I feigned interest, asking questions about the other tenants, about the routines, trying to gauge how she managed everything. She answered, ever so gently, yet every word reminded me of the power she had over everyone in that house. By nightfall, I knew I couldn't wait for morning. The longer I stayed, the less chance I had to leave unnoticed. I waited until she went out to check the mail, slipping quietly from my room. I crept to the bathroom window and tested it. It opened. The window led to a narrow ledge, then to the ground below. Heart pounding, I climbed through, cutting my hands on the wood frame. Once outside, I ran barefoot across the damp lawn, my shoes abandoned in my room. The streetlights blurred as I sprinted, lungs burning, adrenaline propelling me down Seabreeze Lane toward the safety of the main road. I didn't look back. 2 days later, news came that the boarding house had burned in a sudden electrical fire. The fire department had no clue how it started, and Mrs. Rennick was gone. No one saw her leave. I never returned to Harborview, unable to shake the memory of her soft voice, her constant watchfulness, and the way the electrical hum seemed almost alive. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, convinced I hear it. The faint, low hum behind my bedroom wall. The sensation that someone, somewhere, is patiently waiting to tune back into my life. I moved to a small apartment far inland, where the salt air couldn't reach me and the creaks of old houses weren't constant companions. I tried to bury the memory, but it follows me in the quiet moments, the faint humming of electricity, the feeling of eyes watching, even when I know no one is there. I can't look at boarding houses the same way again, or rent that seems too good to be true. The lesson is imprinted. Sometimes kindness masks obsession, and some offers of shelter come with unseen costs. Even though she's gone, I still double-check my doors, and sometimes I press my ear to the walls, half expecting that faint hum. I know it's paranoia, logically, but the fear is a reminder that control can hide behind gentle words and soft smiles. I survived Harborview, but part of me knows some lessons are never truly escaped. Not every offer of kindness is genuine. Trust your instincts, question unusually perfect situations, and remember that vigilance is as important as gratitude, especially when safety is at stake. Moving to Rivergate was supposed to be a fresh start, but I quickly realized that fresh start doesn't make people like you overnight. My parents had transferred jobs, so I was suddenly in a town where everyone already had their friends, their routines, and their reputations. For me, it was about survival, blending in, keeping my head down, and not drawing attention to the fact that I'd just moved here. I spent my first week at Rivergate High observing, watching how kids clustered in predictable groups and laughed at jokes I didn't understand. That's when I met Trent in math class. He had that effortless charm, the kind that makes people want to follow him without thinking twice. He leaned over my desk one day and whispered, "Hey, you new here, right? Don't worry, I'll show you around." His smile was confident, unshakable, and just the right amount of friendly to make a new kid like me want to trust him. By Friday, Trent came up to me with Jackson, another kid from bio. "Hey Caleb," Trent said. "Me and Jackson are going to hang out by the park after school. You in?" The words sounded harmless, casual, but for me it was an opportunity, a way to finally feel included. "Yeah, sure," I said, trying to hide how relieved I felt. After the final bell, I met them at the trail entrance near the river. The light was fading quickly, casting long shadows between the trees. The air smelled damp, earthy, the kind of smell that comes before a storm or a riverbank flood. Trent led the way, and Jackson followed silently. I glanced around. Something felt off. The trail didn't lead straight to the park. It curved into overgrown paths, deeper into the trees. Aren't we going to the park?" I asked, my voice tight. "Shortcut," Trent said casually, his tone too calm. "Trust me, you'll see." The deeper we walked, the more isolated it felt. The city noise faded, replaced by the crunch of fallen leaves and the low hum of the river. My stomach twisted with unease, but I forced it down. Making friends in a new town was hard. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be the kid who says no. But instinct has a way of whispering truths you try to ignore. The trail grew darker as dusk fell, the last orange light disappearing behind the trees. Jackson lagged a little, murmuring something about wishing he had a flashlight. I nodded quietly, my eyes darting between shadows, trying to convince myself the growing pit in my stomach was just nerves. "Almost there," Trent said again, but this time his voice didn't sound like reassurance. It had an edge, a subtle pushiness. I realized he hadn't answered why we weren't seeing the park. We rounded a bend, and there it was, the old pump station. Rusted metal doors hung crooked, and weeds pushed through cracked concrete. Moonlight glinted off broken glass scattered on the ground. 4 older teens were standing in a loose circle, faces hidden by hoodies. They were strangers to me, but they didn't move like they were surprised to see us. They moved like they were waiting. Trent stopped abruptly and turned toward me, his grin suddenly sharp. "So Caleb," he said, voice low, "you've been talking about my sister, huh?" I froze. "What? No, I don't even know your sister." "Bullshit," Trent snapped, stepping closer. The others closed in behind him. Their shadows stretched over me like predators surrounding prey. My chest tightened, my pulse spiking. One of them swung a broken bottle. It grazed my shoulder, slicing through my jacket and scratching my skin. Another reached to grab me, trying to drag me behind the metal shed. I twisted violently, adrenaline kicking in, breaking free for a split second. "Run!" Jackson shouted, though I barely noticed him anymore. My legs carried me before my mind could catch up. Branches clawed at my jacket, roots caught my shoes, but I kept moving. Blood from my shoulder dripped down my arm. Every sound in the woods was amplified, the snap of a twig, my ragged breathing, the footsteps pursuing me. I didn't stop until I burst into the streetlights of a residential area, gasping, bleeding, and terrified. My hands shook so violently I could barely dial 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice cracked as I tried to explain what had just happened. By the time police arrived, I was sitting on the curb, my shoulders stinging and my entire body trembling. They took my statement, carefully writing down every detail I could remember. Trent's voice, the older teens, the pump station, even the broken bottle. An officer, Detective Alvarez, looked grave. "You're not the first kid this has happened to," he said quietly. "This spot along the river is known for initiation videos. Older kids lure younger ones here, beat them up, film it, then post it online." I swallowed hard, nausea twisting my stomach. Why would anyone do that? "Power, fear, attention," Alvarez said bluntly. "Some people think it's a rite of passage. There's no excuse, Caleb. We're reviewing footage from other attacks to see if Trent's group matches any known incidents." I thought back to Trent, his smile, his calm confidence, how easily he'd led me here. That smile had been a mask. That calm had been a lure. The sick realization hit me. The entire night had been planned. Not opportunistic, not random. Me, specifically. "Has anyone seen him at school?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alvarez shook his head. "He's gone. Transferred? Suspended? Unknown. We're checking." The more I thought about it, the heavier the weight became. Trent had known exactly how to push me to trust him, exactly how to lead me down a path that ended with fear and pain, and I hadn't questioned him, not at first. I kept replaying the trail, the twisted trees, the way the pump station appeared like a trap already set. My chest tightened every time I remembered the older teens closing in, the bottle swinging. It wasn't just a scare, it was deliberate. After that night, Rivergate felt smaller. Every alleyway looked threatening. Every friendly face had a shadow lurking behind it. I avoided Trent's usual lunch table, avoided the trail near the river, avoided anyone who seemed too confident or easy to follow. My shoulder healed, but the memory didn't. It was in every reflex, my hands tensing on doorknobs, my ears listening for footsteps when I walked home. Sleep was restless. Every dream had me running through dark woods, always one step behind, always pursued by shadows with empty eyes. The police eventually traced some footage from previous attacks. Other kids had been lured to the pump station in the same way, filmed, and released into the dark afterward. They were lucky to get away. Some weren't. I realized something terrifying. Trent hadn't just been a bad influence. He was a guide, a decoy, someone meant to push me toward a trap I would never forget. And the worst part? He could have come back any day. I talked to my parents about moving again, but they wanted me to stay. I told my counselor at school, but without Trent or the others, there was little anyone could do. I was left with the lesson, the fear, and the memory carved into my mind. Rivergate High looked the same. Students laughing, classrooms buzzing, but I knew better. Beneath that normalcy, traps waited, and predators could wear the friendliest smile. Months passed, but the memory of that night never left. Trent vanished from school the following week. No one knew why. No one asked me questions beyond what the police had recorded. I walked past the river trail only when absolutely necessary, keeping my backpack close, my keys ready. I learned quickly that danger rarely announces itself. Predators don't always scream. Sometimes they smile, joke, invite you along. Sometimes, the scariest things wear the most familiar faces. I eventually found a small group of friends I could trust, ones who respected boundaries and didn't push me into blind decisions. I stayed cautious but not paranoid, remembering that experience every day. Even now, when someone seems too friendly, too insistent, or too perfect in their timing, I feel the old adrenaline spike, the echo of running through woods, branches scratching, blood staining my sleeve. The night taught me that trust is precious, and sometimes saying no, really listening to that little warning inside, is the only thing standing between you and real danger. Not everyone who appears friendly has good intentions. Trust your instincts, question sudden familiarity, and remember that hesitation can save your life. I grew up on the rural outskirts of Pine Hollow, a place where nearly everyone knew your name but still minded their own business. Our town had one gas station, one diner, and a school bus system that ran on hope more than schedules. Some mornings the bus was 15 minutes early, other mornings 20 minutes late. You learned not to panic. You just stood at the end of your driveway and waited. Back then, my house sat at the end of a long dirt road lined with pines so tall they swallowed the sky. The mornings were usually quiet. No cars, no neighbors, just the crunch of frost under my sneakers and the strange stillness right before sunrise. It was a stillness I'd grown used to. That winter morning in 2014 felt no different at first. The air bit at my skin, my breath rose in little clouds, and the darkness had that heavy blue tint that only comes with freezing dawns. I pulled my hood tighter and kept my backpack close to my chest. Then I saw the headlights coming. They were too dim, too low, and too slow to be a regular car. I thought it had to be the bus, even though the glow looked off. The beams spread strangely across the road, like the bulbs were old or dirty. I didn't think much of it. Late bus, weird bus, didn't matter. But when it finally rolled into view, my stomach tightened. It wasn't yellow. It was a pale cream color, almost sickly looking in the cold morning light. The metal siding was dented along one side, and the bus number near the roof was scratched so badly it was unreadable. The windows were dark, too dark. The bus hissed to a stop in front of me, brakes squealing like they needed replacing 20 years ago. The folding door creaked open and a man leaned out. He had tinted glasses, even though dawn was barely breaking, and an expression that never changed, not irritated, not friendly, just blank. "Morning," he said in a monotone voice. "District switched routes today. Get on." I didn't move. Something was wrong. I felt it deep in my chest before I understood it. The seats behind him were completely empty. "Come on," the driver said, tapping the steering wheel impatiently. "I'm running late." His voice didn't match the situation. It didn't sound like someone who was rushing. It sounded like someone pretending to rush. I stepped backward a little. "I've never seen this bus before." He forced out a laugh, quick and sharp. "We've got new ones. Just hop in." But it wasn't new. The ceiling panels were stained. The floor looked scratched. The inside smelled like an old garage, oil and rubber and something warm and metallic. I looked toward the road, hoping maybe a neighbor's porch light would help me think clearly. No one was awake. "Seriously, kid," he said, with a hint of irritation now creeping into his tone. "Don't make this complicated. Get on the bus." My throat tightened. "What about Mr. Dalton?" I asked. "He's my usual driver." The man's jaw twitched. "He's sick today." "Mr. Dalton doesn't get sick," I said before thinking, because it was true. He'd driven the same route for 17 years and bragged about his perfect attendance. The driver's fingers curled around the edge of the steering wheel. "Get on," he repeated, slower this time. I backed away 2 more steps. Then he slammed the door, so hard the entire bus rocked, and stomped on the gas. The bus lurched forward, not down the paved road toward school, but toward the dirt trail that ran behind the woods. The same trail that passed right by my house. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts as the pale bus disappeared between the trees. The taillights flickered briefly before vanishing altogether into the darkness. I stood shaking in the cold, trying to understand what I'd just avoided. Minutes later, no more than 3, the familiar bright yellow school bus came bouncing over the hill, headlights clear, engine loud. Mr. Dalton waved from the driver's seat. "You're up early today," he said as the doors opened. I didn't answer. I kept staring down the trail into the woods, where the wrong bus had gone. I didn't tell anyone what happened at first. Not Mr. Dalton, not my friends, not even my parents. I didn't have the words yet. I just sat on the bus gripping the vinyl seat, replaying the encounter again and again in my head. By lunchtime, Pine Hollow was buzzing with news. A teacher rushed into the cafeteria with her phone in hand, whispering urgently to another staff member. Students leaned over trays of chicken nuggets, trying to listen. Eventually, the announcement came over the intercom. "Students and staff, we have been notified of an attempted abduction 2 towns over this morning. Authorities believe a stolen school bus may have been involved. Please stay in groups when walking home today." I felt the blood drain from my face. A stolen bus. My fork clattered against my lunch tray. My friend Tessa nudged me. "Hey Ava, you okay?" I nodded automatically, but inside everything was spinning. The pale cream bus, the scratched off number, the driver with tinted glasses. I didn't imagine it. Someone really tried to take me. When I got home, Mom was glued to the local news. A grainy image flashed on screen, security footage of a bus almost identical to the one that had stopped for me. Same color, same dents, same missing number. "Terrifying," Mom murmured. "They say the driver tried picking up a girl in Fairbanks County, but she ran." I swallowed hard. "Did they catch him?" "No," she sighed. "They think he's hiding somewhere rural. These backwoods go on forever." The camera panned across a map, tracing possible routes the stolen bus could have taken. One of the highlighted roads was ours. That night I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I heard the hiss of brakes or saw the blank stare of the driver behind those tinted glasses. The worst part was knowing he'd turned down the trail that passed my house, which meant he knew where I lived. For a few weeks, nothing happened. The stolen bus still hadn't been found, though police cars occasionally cruised the back roads. Mom made me wait by the front door instead of at the end of the driveway, and she watched from the window until my real bus arrived. I pretended everything was fine, but I noticed things. A cigarette butt near the tree line that didn't belong to anyone in our family. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt trail we rarely used. A feeling, heavy and tight, that someone was watching. In early spring, I woke up one night to the sound of an engine hum in the woods behind my house. I froze in bed. It wasn't loud, more like a distant idle, low and steady. I slipped out from under the covers and looked out my window. At first, I saw only darkness. Then a single faint light flickered between the trees. Not bright enough for a car. Not steady enough for a flashlight. But exactly the kind of flicker cheap, aging bus headlights might make. My chest tightened. I backed away from the window and woke my parents. Dad grabbed a flashlight and walked the perimeter of the yard, but by the time he got close to the woods, the engine noise faded. He came back inside, shaking his head. "Probably a neighbor's truck," he said. But our nearest neighbor was a mile away. The next morning, I found a long scrape in the dirt trail near our mailbox, like a large vehicle had turned around too sharply. That was when I finally told my parents everything, every detail, every word, every warning sign. Dad called the sheriff that afternoon. Officers searched the woods for days, but the bus was never found. Neither was the man. But deep down, I knew he was still out there. He'd picked Pine Hollow for a reason. By summer, the panic in town faded. People got comfortable again. Parents let their kids bike to the gas station, and the missing bus story became another rumor older students whispered to scare the younger ones. But I didn't forget, and I didn't go near the woods alone. One humid July evening, I stepped outside to bring in a folding chair we'd left by the road after watching fireworks the night before. The sky was dimming fast, fireflies blinking near the tree line. I bent to grab the chair and froze. From far down the dirt trail, I saw headlights. Not bright yellow-white headlights like most cars, but dull, uneven, sickly colored beams that skimmed low across the ground. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped back toward the porch. The vehicle slowed. The hum was familiar. Then the lights abruptly shut off. I could hear gravel under tires as something large stopped moving, stopped watching, stopped waiting. I backed up slowly, hands shaking as I reached the door. I slipped inside and locked it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break ribs. Dad came running. "Ava, what's wrong?" "I saw it," I whispered. "The bus. He's still here." Dad grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto the porch, but the trail was empty again. No lights, no sound, nothing disturbed but the dust rising off the road. We left Pine Hollow 2 months later. My parents said it was for their jobs, but I knew better. They didn't want to risk losing me to the headlights in the woods. Even now, years later, whenever I'm walking down a dark road and see a pair of headlights in the distance, my breath catches. Because part of me still expects them to flicker, to sputter, to glow that pale cream color. And I still don't know if the driver ever stopped looking for another kid standing alone at dawn. Trust your instincts. Hesitation can save your life. Not every danger announces itself loudly, and sometimes the smallest warning sign is the one that matters most. Some nights in Briarwood Hill feel colder than they should, colder in a way that settles beneath your jacket and crawls up your spine. That's what I remember most about the night this all happened. It was nearly 11 p.m. The bookstore had just closed, and I'd missed the last bus by maybe 2 minutes. The taillights were disappearing down the road before I even made it to the stop. I wasn't new to walking home. It wasn't ideal, but Briarwood Hill was the kind of college town where the worst thing you typically worried about was a raccoon tipping over someone's trash. The streetlights along Briarwood Avenue glowed a weak amber, and the sidewalks were mostly empty. Only a few bars still had music drifting out their doors. I wrapped my scarf tighter and started the 30-minute walk back to my apartment. Around the halfway mark, just past a row of older apartment buildings, I heard quick footsteps behind me. I tensed, only relaxing when a girl about my age jogged up beside me, her breath puffing in the cold. "Sorry, didn't mean to freak you out," she said, laughing lightly. She wore a denim jacket, too thin for the weather, and her blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. "I'm Lacey." I told her my name, and before I realized it, we were walking side by side like we were already friends. She said she'd been ditched at a house party and didn't want to walk alone. Her cheerful energy made the dark streets feel less threatening. We joked about professors, campus drama, the awful cafeteria coffee. For a moment, it felt stupid to ever worry about the walk home. Then, somewhere behind us, a man shouted. The sound cracked through the quiet like breaking glass. We both turned. A tall figure was weaving along the sidewalk, yelling slurred threats at no one in particular. His steps were unsteady, but he was moving in our direction. "Let's just keep walking," Lacey whispered. "My aunt's rental is just around the corner. We can duck in there until he passes." I didn't question it. Not yet. But I should have, because that was the moment the night began to tilt into something I still have trouble talking about. Lacey walked faster, tugging gently at my sleeve like she didn't want to lose momentum. I kept checking over my shoulder. The man had closed some distance but wasn't quite on us yet. His shouting ricocheted off buildings, making it hard to tell how close he really was. "You sure your aunt won't mind?" I asked. "She's not home. She's visiting my cousins," Lacey said quickly. "But she keeps a spare key in this little ceramic frog by the door. It's fine. She wouldn't care." It sounded plausible. And in the moment, fear makes you accept whatever story lets you feel safe. We turned onto a side street, the kind with old Victorian homes built long before any of the modern apartments existed. The houses loomed over the cracked sidewalk, their roofs sharp against the night sky. A few porch lights glowed weakly, but the rest of the street felt deserted, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. "Right there." Lacey pointed to a large blue house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. One second-floor window glowed with a weak yellow light. Something in my gut tightened. The rest of the house was pitch black. "Is someone inside?" I asked. Lacey didn't answer. She kept walking, her pace quickening. As we got closer, I glanced back toward the lit window, and the light blinked out suddenly. Not dimmed, not flickered, just snapped off, like someone had stepped away from it. I stopped walking entirely. "Lacey," I said slowly, "who's in that house?" She turned to me with a smile that didn't match her eyes. "Come on, don't make this weird. We just need to get inside before that guy catches up." There was pressure in her voice, not panic, urgency, almost expectation. I stepped back. "Rena," she said sharply, "don't." My heart hammered, and somehow I finally listened to the part of me that had been whispering warnings since the moment we turned down this street. "I'm not going in there," I said. And that was when everything changed. I started backing away from the porch, slowly at first. I didn't want to spook her. I didn't understand what was happening, only that the air around me suddenly felt thick and wrong. "Rena," Lacey said again, more forcefully. I shook my head. "Something's off. I'm not going inside." Behind us, the drunken man had stopped shouting. The quiet was worse. I didn't know where he was anymore. When I took one more step back, Lacey lunged. Her fingers clamped around my wrist so hard I gasped. For someone so small, she was unbelievably strong. Her nails dug in deep, and her cheerful expression snapped into something cold and frantic. "She's here!" Lacey screamed toward the door. "Open it!" The house responded. A tall silhouette appeared behind the cracked doorway, a figure standing just inside the darkness. I couldn't make out a face, just height and stillness. The door creaked wider as if inviting me in. Lacey yanked on my arm, trying to drag me up the porch steps. My shoes scraped across the wood. "Stop! Let go!" I cried, twisting, pulling, fighting against her iron grip. Her voice dropped to a frightening whisper, low and urgent. "Don't make this harder." I saw movement inside the house. The tall figure shifting, preparing. Panic detonated inside me. I wrenched my wrist hard, ignoring the pain as her nails ripped skin. I twisted, shoved my shoulder into her, and ripped free. For one frozen second, Lacey just stared at me, her expression almost disappointed. Then I ran. I sprinted down the street, tearing down sidewalks, cutting across yards, not stopping to breathe. I didn't hear the drunken man anymore. I didn't hear Lacey chasing me. All I heard was my heartbeat and the pounding of my shoes. I didn't stop until I burst into the fluorescent glow of a gas station. The cashier jumped when I slammed my hands on the counter. "Please, call the police," I sobbed. "Someone tried to take me." He didn't ask questions. He just grabbed the phone. For the first time that night, I felt something like safety. But it didn't last long. When the officers arrived, I showed them everything. My bleeding wrist, the direction I came from, the street with the old Victorian homes. My voice shook as I tried to recount the details. They exchanged looks I didn't like. Looks that suggested uncertainty. Not disbelief, but something close. One officer, a middle-aged woman named Porter, finally nodded. "Let's check it out." I sat trembling in the back of the police car as we drove to the house. The road looked different in their headlights. Less eerie, more ordinary, but the dread in my stomach only grew. "There," I said, pointing. The house looked exactly the same, except now the entire place was dark. No faint light in the upstairs window, no movement inside. We got out. My legs felt like wet sand. Officer Porter knocked on the door. No response. She tried the handle. It swung open easily. "Did you say your friend's aunt owned this place?" the other officer asked. She said that," I whispered. They swept the house while I waited on the porch. Cold air drifted out the open doorway, carrying a smell like mildew and old metal. I tried not to look at the window where the light had flickered earlier. After a few minutes, Officer Porter reappeared, her expression grim. "Rena, this isn't a rental. The house was broken into about 4 days ago. Owners live out of state. Neighbors reported seeing people coming in and out." My stomach dropped. "So, someone was inside?" "Yes," she said quietly. "But they're gone now." The other officer came up from the basement, his flashlight in hand. "You should see what's down there," he muttered to Porter. She gave me a firm look. "Stay here." They disappeared inside again. I hugged myself against the cold. When they returned, neither spoke at first. Porter finally cleared her throat. "We found blankets, canned food, evidence someone's been staying here." I waited for the rest. When it came, it chilled me more than the night air. "And there's a heavy chain bolted to a pipe in the basement." I stared at her, numb. Whoever Lacey was, and whoever stood behind that door, they weren't squatters looking for shelter. They were waiting for someone, and that someone had almost been me. The police drove me home after taking my statement. They promised to increase patrols near campus. They said they'd search for both the girl and the man. But deep down, I knew they were already behind. That house had been cleared out too neatly. Whoever had been living there knew how to vanish fast. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. For days, every corner of Briarwood Hill felt sharper. Shadows felt longer. Strangers' smiles felt rehearsed. I couldn't stop thinking about Lacey, not the cheerful girl who joked about college pressure, but the one who screamed for someone inside that house to open the door. The girl whose grip left bruises around my wrist for weeks. The girl who acted like she wasn't working alone. Whenever I replay the moment, the part that haunts me isn't her screaming. It's the expression she gave me when I escaped. That look of disappointment. Like I had ruined something she'd prepared for. Police never found her. Or the man. Or any trace of who they were. The house was boarded up again 2 days later, and students avoided that street entirely. I still walk fast when I'm alone at night. I still cross the street when someone tries to make friendly conversation after dark. And sometimes I still imagine a pair of eyes watching from the window of an abandoned house. Maybe it's paranoia, or maybe it's instinct, because you never really forget the night someone tried to pull you into a place you weren't meant to leave. I moved to Black Hill in the winter of 2011, though I couldn't tell you now exactly why. Maybe it was the rent being cheap, or maybe it was the idea of a small town where I could rebuild myself after a rough breakup. Black Hill was a former mill town. The mills shut down long before I got there, leaving behind rusted water towers and smokestacks like crooked tombstones. The locals kept to themselves. Shops closed early. Streets emptied before dusk. The entire place felt like it was holding its breath. I rented a dim little apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, and the air carried a constant chemical warmth from the dryers below. But it was home. I didn't know anyone, and I barely talked to my neighbors, but I figured that was just part of getting by here. One night, after a long shift at the grocery store where I bagged cans and cereal boxes for customers who never made eye contact, I missed the last bus. I decided to walk home down Black Hill Road, a stretch of cracked asphalt lined with shuttered storefronts and flickering street lamps. The cold was brutal, bone-biting, like the kind that reminded you winter wasn't playing around. Halfway down the road, while I was blowing into my hands for warmth, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a girl around my age. She had a frayed parka, hair tucked messily into a beanie, and cheeks red from the cold. She smiled easily, too easily for someone walking alone at night. "Cold out, huh?" she said, falling into step beside me. "Yeah," I replied, grateful for human company. "You live around here?" "Just up the road," she said brightly. "I'm Rena." She talked casually at first: weather, work, what I was doing in Black Hill. But slowly her questions turned strange. "Do you live alone? Do your parents check on you often? Does anybody know where you are tonight?" I laughed it off, thinking she was socially awkward or just trying too hard to make conversation. But that uneasy prickle in my spine began to grow. Then a drunk guy across the street yelled something unintelligible at us. Rena grabbed my arm. "Come on," she said urgently. "We should hide at my place." Before I could protest, she tugged me toward a shadowed street where a single old Victorian house waited in the dark. The Victorian stood halfway down the block, tall and crooked like it was leaning away from the wind. Most of the windows were boarded up, except for one on the second floor where a dim yellow light flickered. I hesitated. Nothing about the place looked lived in. "You sure this is your house?" I asked. Rena nodded, still clutching my arm. "Don't worry, it's warmer inside." The front door creaked open before we even reached it, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the warmth she promised wasn't there. Instead, the air smelled like damp wood and sulfur, sharp enough to sting my throat. The wallpaper peeled in strips. The floor groaned beneath us. "Sorry about the smell," Rena said, but her voice sounded off, lower, like she was forcing a tone that didn't belong to her. I heard something upstairs. Movement. Slow. Dragging. Rhythmic, like someone pulling heavy feet across old floorboards. "Who else lives here?" I asked, my heartbeat picking up. Rena smiled, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, too practiced. "Someone who wants to meet you," she answered. Before I could react, I heard the click of the door behind me. She'd locked it. I took a step back. "Hey, look, maybe I should just go." "You're already here," she said softly. Her eyes didn't blink. "He gets hungry when the cold comes." The dragging upstairs grew louder. A tall figure appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a stained sheet. Limbs too long, spine bent at a crooked angle. Something underneath the sheet moved slow and deliberate, like parasites shifting under skin. The figure swayed once, then began its descent. Rena whispered to it, her voice tender, coaxing like a caretaker calming a sick child. "It's okay," she murmured. "He's here." Fear finally hit me like a fist to the chest. I didn't wait. I bolted into the kitchen, shoved the back door open so hard it cracked, and ran jumping fences, sprinting across yards, breath burning my lungs until I hit the main road. I flagged down the first car I saw with frantic bangs on the window. They let me in, I didn't look back. The next morning, I did the thing horror movie characters never do. I called the police. I wasn't about to let whatever that thing was stay out there. When the officers arrived, I explained everything. The house, Rena, the smell, the figure on the stairs. They didn't laugh. They gave me that look cops give when someone sounds traumatized but possibly unstable. I insisted on leading them to the house. When we turned the corner onto that quiet street, my stomach dropped. The house was gone, burned to the ground. The fire department was still spraying down blackened beams and collapsed walls. The place was a smoldering skeleton. The officer beside me raised an eyebrow. "You sure this is where you were last night?" "It was here," I said, but my voice cracked. "It was right here." The fire chief overheard us and walked over. "That place caught fire around 4 a.m., he said. "Old wiring, probably, but nobody's lived here in hell 20-30 years. I shook my head. "No, there was a girl, Rena, and something else." The chief gave me a pitying smile. "Kid, this house didn't have electricity. It's been condemned since '92. I felt the ground tilt under my feet. "How could there be a light?" I whispered. "I saw a light." The officer shrugged. "Could have been squatters." But I knew what I saw wasn't a squatter. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the long limbs under the sheet, the way Rena's voice shifted, the way she had asked if anyone knew where I was. By morning, I convinced myself it had been adrenaline, cold, exhaustion. Maybe I'd hallucinated some of it. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, I walked home from work again, this time taking a different street. As I passed a broken street lamp, my breath caught. A girl in a frayed parka walked just ahead of me. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. I knew it was her. After that night, I changed my schedule. I refused to work, closing shifts. I avoided the old roads. I tried to act normal around my coworkers, but paranoia had sunk into me like a cold that wouldn't leave. Still, Black Hill had its way of pulling people back into its shadows. One night, during a power outage, I stood on my apartment balcony listening to the silence. No hum of dryers, no passing cars, just the hollow quiet of a town that seemed eager to hide its secrets in the dark. That's when I heard footsteps below. Soft, slow, familiar. I leaned over the railing. A figure stood on the sidewalk, frayed parka, hood up, hands in pockets. Her face was hidden, but her posture told me everything. It was the same tilt of the shoulders, the same stillness. "Rena?" I whispered before I could stop myself. The figure looked up. Not quickly, just a gradual lift of the head, like someone waking from a long sleep. The hood slid back slightly, revealing a pale cheek and a hint of dark hair. Enough for recognition, not enough for comfort. "How did you find me?" I asked. Her voice floated up to me, soft as frost. "You left before he could finish." My stomach twisted. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Her smile appeared too wide, just like in the house. "You don't have to. I can come up." As if on cue, the building's side door creaked open. Someone or something was inside. I backed away from the balcony, heart pounding. The lights were still out. The hallway was pitch black. My only thought was to get out. I ran down the stairs, ignoring the sound of slow, dragging steps above me. When I reached the ground floor, the lobby door burst open as if pushed by a strong wind. Rena stood there, closer than ever. "Come back," she said. "He's still hungry." I shoved past her and ran into the street. My breath froze in the air as I sprinted without direction, just needing distance, any distance from her. When I finally stopped, gasping, she was gone. But Black Hill wasn't done with me yet. I couldn't keep running from something that wasn't alive, not in the normal sense, anyway. After a week of no sleep, no appetite, and no peace, I knew I had to confront the place where it all started. Black Hill Road. When I arrived, the street was as silent as the night I met her. Half the lamps were dead. The wind carried that metallic smell that reminded me of the burned house. I stood at the empty lot where the Victorian once stood, now just frozen dirt. "I know you're here," I said, my breath clouding. "Just tell me what you want." A soft crunch of snow behind me. Rena stepped into the light, or what little light there was. Her parka looked older now, more frayed, stained by ash. Her face was pale, eyes dark and hollow, but not hateful, Just empty, like she'd been waiting. "You left us," she whispered. "You ran. There was something in that house. He needed someone." Her voice trembled like a child arguing with a parent. "He needed warmth. He needed life. You were supposed to stay." I shook my head. I didn't owe him anything. Her expression warped sadness, twisting into something sharp. "You owe times me asterisk." She stepped forward, and the air chilled around me. Something behind her moved tall, crooked, shifting under a sheet that wasn't really a sheet anymore, but skin stretched thin. It reached toward me. I ran not away, but toward the brighter street where cars passed. I heard her voice behind me. "You can't run forever." Maybe she was right. Maybe some things follow you no matter where you go. But that night, I made it out of Black Hill for good. To this day, when I walk alone and a street lamp flickers out, I check the shadows ahead, because sometimes, just beyond the circle of light, I see a girl in a frayed parka walking one step in front of me, and I never follow. Not every friendly face means safety, and not every invitation deserves trust. When something feels wrong, listen to it. Your instincts may save your life long before logic does. I used to tell people Maple Ridge was the kind of town where even the shadows felt friendly. Small enough that everyone knew the local dogs by name, quiet enough that the loudest thing after 9 p.m. was the convenience store's humming sign. I moved there when I was 20, after a messy breakup and a restless feeling I couldn't shake. My mom used to say I'd been born walking too fast, always chasing something I couldn't see. By 24, I had settled into a routine that felt safe, maybe too safe in hindsight. I worked evening shifts at Hearth and Honey Bakery, a warm little brick building that smelled like cinnamon and rising dough even on its worst days. My boss, Julie, trusted me to close most nights. I liked being the last one out, cutting the lights one by one, hearing the ovens click as they cooled, locking up and stepping into the quiet street with the leftover warmth still clinging to my clothes. My apartment was a 30-minute walk away. Most nights I didn't mind it. The streets were well lit, lined with maple trees that made the whole place glow orange in fall. I listened to podcasts or just let my thoughts wander. Maple Ridge felt familiar enough that danger wasn't something I thought about. That was the privilege of small towns. You didn't realize how easy it was to feel safe until suddenly you weren't anymore. That October had been strange, though. Rainier than usual, darker. People talked about break-ins a few towns over, but nobody paid it much mind. Not until the SUV. I first noticed it on a Wednesday night, the kind of night when the rain came down in thin, icy lines that made everything look blurry. I saw an older brown SUV drive by slowly, like someone searching for a house number. I didn't think much of it. People got lost all the time. Google Maps failed all the time. But when it came back again, same speed, same dim headlights, I felt something tighten in my stomach. By the third pass, I convinced myself it was probably nothing. Just a stranger who didn't know the area. Now I wish I had listened to that instinct. I wish I had trusted the unease curling like smoke in my chest. Because that night, Maple Ridge stopped being the place where shadows felt friendly. It became the place where I learned how quickly safety can slip through your fingers. The SUV slowed beside me with a soft hiss of wet tires on asphalt. I stopped walking, pulling my hood back so I could actually hear him. Rain slid down the man's rolled-down window, dripping onto his arm. He looked middle-aged, maybe early 50s, with a baseball cap pulled low and two bright eyes that didn't match his shaky voice. "Sorry, miss," he said. "Do you know where Willow Creek Lane is? GPS keeps sending me in circles." There was no Willow Creek Lane in Maple Ridge. I'd lived there long enough to know every street, but he sounded so anxious, so earnestly confused, that I stepped closer without thinking. "Let me see your map," I said, leaning in. That's when I heard it. A click behind me, soft but unmistakable. The back door unlocking. I turned just in time to see the door crack open and a second figure move inside the vehicle, a hooded shape, face hidden, body crouched like he'd been waiting. The passenger yelled, "Now!" Everything inside me snapped awake. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on wet pavement. The hooded man lunged from the back seat, grabbing for my arm. His fingers scraped my jacket, tightening, and I twisted violently, nearly falling. "Let go!" I screamed, the words tearing out of me raw. I don't know how I slipped free. Panic made everything jumbled and frantic. I bolted into the nearest narrow alley without looking, my shoes slamming against puddles. The rain was loud enough to swallow their footsteps, but I could hear them anyway, the scrape of boots, the low curses, the frantic shuffle of two people chasing something that almost got away. My lungs burned, my heart stuttered. I jumped, grabbing the lowest rung of a rusted fire escape ladder. My wet fingers almost slid off, but I wrapped my arms around it and held on like my life depended on it, because it did. Hands clamped around my legs, nails dug into my ankles. I kicked, connecting with something soft, a stomach, maybe a face. The man grunted. "Pull her down!" someone yelled. I screamed so loudly my throat felt like it split open. I screamed until I could barely breathe. The rain, the struggle, the echo of the alley, everything blurred together. Then a new sound cracked the night open. A garage door slamming up, and a man's voice furious and close. "Hey, get away from her." Footsteps thundered. A mechanic in grease-stained overalls came rushing out holding a metal tire iron like he'd been waiting for a fight. My attackers scattered so fast I heard one slip in the mud. The SUV screeched off a second later, fishtailing into the night. I didn't let go of the ladder until the mechanic pried my fingers loose. The mechanic's name turned out to be Rick Dalton, owner of Dalton's Auto and Tire. I had passed his garage 1,000 times, always noticing the neon open sign glowing in the window when I walked home late. I never thought I'd end up crouched on the oil-stained floor of his shop, shaking uncontrollably while he locked the door and grabbed a heavy flashlight. "You hurt?" he asked, crouching beside me. My legs," I stammered. "I think they scratched me. I don't know." He handed me a clean towel from a drawer. "Use this. You're soaked." I pressed it to my face, trying to breathe. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Rick turned off the loud heater overhead so he could hear better. Outside, the rain slammed against the asphalt in a violent rhythm. "What happened?" he asked gently. I told him everything, my voice breaking more than once. When I reached the part about the back door opening, Rick swore under his breath. "They've been doing something like this in towns south of here," he said. I heard customers talk about it. Same type of SUV. My stomach dropped. "So they've done this before?" He nodded grimly. "And they'll keep trying until they grab someone." He grabbed his phone. "I'm calling the police. You stay right here. No one's getting near you again tonight." The officers arrived in less than 10 minutes. Blue lights flashed across the puddles outside. They took my statement twice, first in the garage, then again in the cruiser while I tried to stop shaking long enough to remember the details. Brown SUV, older model. Dented left side. A man in a baseball cap. A second man in a hood. "We've had similar reports in Pine Brook and Sandville," the officer said. "Always more than one offender. Always looking for women walking alone." Hearing it said so plainly made everything feel sharper, realer. By the time they drove me home, it was after midnight. Rick insisted on following behind in his truck until I was safely inside my apartment. When I locked the door behind me, the silence hit all at once. Heavy, suffocating. I showered until the water ran cold, washed mud off my legs, and stared at the faint bruises forming around my ankles. "Evidence," the officer had said, as if the proof wasn't already carved into my memory. I crawled into bed fully clothed, every light on, the sound of the SUV's skidding tires replaying in my mind. Sleep didn't come. Not that night, not for many nights after. The next morning, Maple Ridge felt different. Not the streets, not the trees, not the storefronts, but me. I felt split open, like the version of myself who used to walk home with earbuds in didn't exist anymore. Julie, my boss, hugged me so tightly I almost cried. "You're taking a week off," she said, no arguing. Her hands were shaking when she let go. The police called asking for more details. I tried to remember license plate fragments, but all I could recall was mud splashing up the side of the SUV and the sound of the door unlocking. My mom drove 3 hours from the city to stay with me. She cleaned my apartment like fighting dust could fix what happened. My dad kept checking the locks, the windows, the back door, then checking them again. Every few minutes, one of them would ask, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I wasn't okay. I jumped at every car engine outside. At night, I slept on the couch facing the door, too afraid of my own bedroom. I walked fast, head down, keys between my fingers like claws. One evening, a week after the incident, I went to Dalton's Auto with a box of pastries to thank Rick. He took one look at me and said, "You holding up?" I shrugged, trying. He wiped his hands on a rag. "You want me to install a camera outside your building? I got extra equipment." I stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because you deserve to feel safe, and because if they come back, I want them caught." Something in me softened, like a knot loosening. "Thank you," I whispered. That night, I realized something important. Healing wasn't about pretending I wasn't scared. It was about building a life that fear couldn't control. I signed up for a self-defense class. I bought a personal alarm and pepper spray. I asked the bakery to adjust my schedule so I wouldn't walk home alone in the dark. My parents helped me install new locks and cameras. I was still scared, but scared didn't mean powerless. It meant I had survived. Something meant to break me. Weeks passed. Leaves fell. The rain slowed. Maple Ridge started to feel familiar again, though never the same as before. The police never found the SUV. They suspected the offenders were part of a group moving between towns, striking when the streets were quiet and the victims unsuspecting. The kind of criminals who relied on routine on women like me feeling safe. One night, I walked past Dalton's Auto and saw Rick closing up. I stopped to say hi. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You headed home?" he asked. "Yeah, but I won't walk it alone anymore." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Smart." I hesitated before saying, "Do you ever think about that night, the way it happened so fast?" "All the time," he said. "But you fought like hell. That's why you're still here." His words stuck with me. Life slowly stitched itself back together. I returned to work. I stopped waking up breathless. I took walks during the day, listening to the rustle of leaves without flinching. I didn't erase the fear, I learned to live beside it. One afternoon, a teenage girl came into the bakery. She recognized me. News had spread. Small towns talked. She asked quietly, "Is it true? Did something almost happen to you?" I nodded. She swallowed hard. "My mom says I shouldn't walk alone at night anymore." She said, "You're the reason." I didn't know whether to feel proud or sad. Maybe both. Before she left, I said, "Tell your mom she's right, and tell her you're not being dramatic, you're being smart." She nodded and squeezed her phone tighter. That's what stayed with me, the idea that what happened to me changed more than just my life. It changed the town. It made people look out for each other. It turned silence into awareness. I still think about the SUV. The sound of the door unlocking. The rain hitting the street as I ran. But I don't think about it with the same shaking fear anymore. I think about how I lived. I think about how I refused to be taken. And I think about how even on the darkest nights, someone can burst through a door with a tire iron and remind you that there are still good people in the world. Safety isn't about paranoia. It's about listening to your instincts, protecting yourself, and trusting the people who step up when danger finds you. Bad intentions can hide behind friendly voices, but courage lives in every choice we make to stay aware, stand strong, and speak out. Long before that night at Harper's house, before the police tape and news vans, I used to believe old lakefront homes were charming. I grew up in a regular 2-story suburban place, the kind where every room smelled faintly like detergent and last night's dinner. So anytime a friend had a house with history, creaky floors, antique portraits, rooms no one used, I treated it like a novelty, something cool, something different. Harper's house was all times of that. Her family owned one of the oldest properties on Lakeshore Drive, a massive Victorian with a steep roof and 3 full floors, not counting the unfinished attic. The place had been in her family for generations. Her parents traveled often for work, leaving Harper in charge as long as she followed 3 rules. ***, no parties, no unlocked doors, and absolutely no one upstairs. ***. Naturally, on the weekend they flew to Boston. She broke all 3. I didn't even want to go at first. I'd had a long week at my landscaping job. My shoulders were stiff, my eyes heavy. But Harper insisted, said she needed someone calm around in case the night got chaotic. That was her way of complimenting me. So I showed up just after 9, carrying a 12-pack I'd probably take most of back home. The place was already buzzing. Music echoed off the old walls, and laughter spilled down the hallways. People danced in the living room beneath chandeliers, older than everyone in the house. The third floor was blocked off with a velvet rope Harper stole from a school theater set. Like that was enough to curb curiosity. It's not a joke, Harper told me early in the night. My parents freak out about those rooms. A lot of antiques, some expensive stuff. They made me promise no one goes up. And your solution, I said, was a rope? She shrugged. A rope and your responsible energy. I laughed, shook my head, and by midnight stepped outside for air. The lake wind was sharp and cold, but refreshing after the packed living room. I leaned against the back railing, staring at the still water. That's when I looked up. A figure moved across the third-floor window, slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. At first I told myself I imagined it. Someone downstairs had walked under a light, maybe a reflection, maybe a shadow. But then the figure passed the window again. Taller than anyone I knew, walking with intention. My stomach dropped. Nobody was supposed to be up there. I stepped back inside, heart starting to beat harder, and went to find Harper. Someone's upstairs, I told her. I saw them in your parents' window. Her face fell. No one should be up there. Exactly, I said, and without thinking too long about what we were getting into, we headed for the staircase. The staircase to the third floor was tucked behind a narrow hallway, barely wide enough for both of us. Each step creaked under our weight, the sound swallowed by the thump of music from below. Halfway up, the temperature changed the kind of cold that didn't feel natural for late summer. Harper hugged her arms. My mom always says this floor doesn't heat right, she whispered. Something with old vents. Yeah, I said. Let's go with that. We reached the landing where a small nightlight glowed weakly, illuminating walls lined with dusty picture frames. All old family portraits, stone-faced men in suits, women with braided hair, no one smiling. Typical Victorian relics, but the kind that made the air feel heavier. Harper pushed open the hallway door. It groaned loudly, and the sound echoed way too long. Her parents' bedroom was the first door on the right. The doorframe was carved with delicate ivy patterns, something her great-grandfather designed, according to a story she'd once told me. Tonight, the door was cracked open about 3 inches. Harper's voice thinned to a whisper. I didn't open that. A draft of cold air drifted from inside the room. It wasn't the normal type of cold, it felt like opening a freezer. I stepped forward before she did. Rowan, she warned. I'll just look, I whispered. If someone's messing around, we'll send them back down. I nudged the door with my foot, expecting a party idiot to jump out laughing. Instead, the room was dimly lit by moonlight pouring through tall windows. The curtains swayed slightly, though the windows were shut. The antique dresser drawers were open, clothes everywhere. And a man stood there, tall, shoulders hunched, wearing a dark hooded jacket. His back faced us as he rifled through a jewelry box. When he turned, the faint light hit the mask covering his face, a white cloth tied behind his head, eyes cut out unevenly. He didn't speak, didn't yell, just stared. My breath vanished. Harper grabbed my sleeve. Hey, we're calling the cops, I blurted, my voice cracking. You need to go. The man tilted his head like he was studying us. Then he lifted something in his right hand. The metallic glint caught the moonlight. An ice pick. Back up, Harper whispered urgently. We stepped away. He took one step toward us. I felt the air shift, felt something primal telling me to run. But he didn't attack. Instead, without a sound, he darted past us, almost brushing my shoulder, disappearing down the staircase with impossible speed. Go! I yelled, grabbing Harper's arm. We chased after him because instinct is stupid and doesn't think things through. But by the time we reached the kitchen, the back door swung open, banging in the wind. The man sprinted into the woods behind the house. Gone. Just gone. Harper stood frozen near the back door, trembling. Rowan. He was in my parents' room. He went through their things. I know, I said, trying to catch my breath. Call the police. Now. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unlock her phone. I grabbed it gently and dialed for her. The dispatcher's calm voice felt unreal against the chaos inside my head. While we waited for officers to arrive, We made our way back to the living room where music still blared and people kept partying as if nothing upstairs had happened. The contrast made everything feel surreal. I shut the music off. "What the hell, Rowan?" someone yelled. Harper raised her voice. "Everyone, get downstairs. Now. This isn't a joke." People grumbled, confused, but the sight of her face shut them up. They gathered in the foyer just as the first police cruiser pulled up the driveway. 2 officers came inside, and Harper immediately burst into explanations. "He was tall," she said. "Hooded jacket, white mask. He was going through jewelry. My parents' room, 3rd floor. He had a weapon." The officers asked us to guide them upstairs. I went with them. Harper stayed downstairs with the group. My hands felt numb the whole walk up. In the bedroom, the officers inspected everything. Open drawers, scattered clothes, the creaking window, the jewelry box lying on its side. One of them said, "You're lucky you 2 weren't hurt. This guy's been hitting lake houses for the past 2 months." "What?" "Lakefront burglaries," he said. "Always top floors. He breaks in early, usually before dark, and hides. Waits for homeowners to leave or go to sleep. Never hits the main level first. Wants time." The thought chilled me. "He was here before the party even started?" "Almost definitely," the officer said. "Probably watched all of you arrive." I scanned the room again, the shadows, the corners, the closet door still slightly ajar. A wave of nausea hit me. "What about the mask?" I asked. "Does that match?" "He wears different coverings," the officer said, "but the pattern is the same. Tall, male, slim, quiet, starts upstairs, leaves fast, never caught." I didn't like that answer. Downstairs, people whispered nervously as more patrol cars arrived. Harper hugged herself, pacing. She looked worse every passing minute. "He could have been here for hours," she murmured, watching, listening. I didn't disagree. The police stayed for almost 2 hours. They took photos, dusted for prints, collected the fallen jewelry box, examined the back door latch. They asked Harper a long list of questions. When the rope went up, how many guests were invited, whether she locked every door before the party began. I could tell she was embarrassed to admit half of it, but shock does strange things to people. It rearranges priorities fast. When the officers finally left, clearing the scene, the house emptied faster than it filled. Cars peeled out of the driveway. Some people muttered apologies, others didn't say a word. By 1:30 in the morning, the place was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the couch rubbing my temples. Harper dropped beside me, legs pulled to her chest. "He was just times standing times there, Rowan." Her voice cracked. "Going through my parents' things like it was normal." "He wasn't normal," I said. "That wasn't some bored teenager." "Why the ice pick?" she asked softly. "Because it's quiet," I said before thinking. "Doesn't make noise like a gunshot." She flinched. "Sorry," I sighed. "I shouldn't have said that." "No, you're right." She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. "I can't stop thinking about him being upstairs before we got there, just hiding, listening to everything, watching us walk around like idiots." I swallowed hard. "If you hadn't sealed the stairs, people would have wandered up. And maybe gotten hurt," she whispered. "God." She leaned her head on my shoulder, exhausted. The house felt too big, too empty, too old. Every sound pipes shifting, wood settling made us both tense. "You staying here tonight?" she asked. "No," I said. "And you're not, either." She looked at me like she wanted to protest, but didn't. "Okay." We packed her a bag, shut every light off, and locked up. When we stepped outside, the lake was calm again, the forest still, too still. I checked the woods one last time before we drove off. I could have sworn I saw movement between the trees, a tall silhouette, then nothing. 2 days later, I got a call from the detective assigned to the case. I expected updates, maybe news about fingerprints or security cameras. Instead, he asked if he could meet at Harper's house. When we arrived, he was already waiting on the porch. The air smelled like rain, and the lake breeze tugged at his coat. "We found something," he said, "upstairs." My stomach tightened. He led us to the 3rd floor again. The bedroom looked cleaner now. Harper's parents had returned and restored everything to their liking. But the detective didn't stop there. He walked to the far end of the hall, to a storage room none of us had reason to open. "We inspected this room after you left," he said quietly, "and found evidence the intruder stayed longer than we first thought." He flicked on the light. In the corner behind stacked boxes sat a small pile of items, an empty water bottle, food wrappers, a crumpled blanket, and worn footprints on the dusty floor. "He camped out here?" I asked. "At least a day," the detective said. "Maybe more. The wrappers are from a convenience store about a mile from here." Harper covered her mouth. "He could have heard everything," she whispered. "Our conversations, our voices, everything. He was waiting for an opportunity," the detective added. "Possibly planned to come down later in the night. So when we caught him," I said slowly, "we interrupted him." "Yes," the detective said. "You did." We left the room feeling smaller than when we entered. As we stepped back into the hallway, sunlight filtered through the tall windows, but the house still felt cold. On the drive home, Harper sat quietly, staring out at the bright blue lake stretching beyond the road. "Rowan," she finally said. "Yeah? If you hadn't looked up at that window." I didn't let her finish. "I know," I said, "but we did. That's what matters." She nodded but didn't look relieved. "Not really. Because some truths don't leave you with comfort. Sometimes the scariest part isn't the break-in, or the chase, or even the threat itself. It's learning how close danger was before you ever realized it, how long it watched, waited, listened, and how easily it can happen again. Evil doesn't always break down the door. Sometimes it slips in quietly, unnoticed, and hides in the spaces we assume are safe. Always trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and never mistake familiarity for security. Awareness is not fear, it's survival." I still remember the way Ridgewater looked the first time I drove into town back in August of 2008, fog hanging low over the pine trees, the old mill by the river humming like it had a heartbeat of its own, and students hauling boxes across the campus lawn while parents yelled reminders they'd forget by the next day. I was 18, unsure of who I was supposed to become, but convinced college would hand me some kind of blueprint. Instead, it handed me Miles. He lived across the hall in a dorm that smelled like old carpet and ramen. The first week of classes, he knocked on my door holding a burned CD with a skull drawn on it in Sharpie. "You ever heard Ash Chapel?" he asked. I shook my head. "Then tonight, your world changes." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The band wasn't mainstream, more like something whispered about at parties by guys who spent too much time on obscure forums. Industrial metal mixed with eerie chanting, the kind of music that felt like it crawled under your skin and stayed there. Their imagery was even worse. Soot-covered masks, church ruins, bonfires that made the flames look hungry. Miles treated it all like scripture. At first, I laughed it off, writing him off as just another college kid trying on a personality. We all did that at 18. But the more time I spent around him, the more I noticed things that didn't feel like a phase. He kept his room dark, curtains always closed. He collected newspaper clippings about abandoned churches. He scribbled strange symbols in the margins of his notebooks, shapes that looked like crosses bent the wrong direction. One night while we walked to the dining hall, he stopped under a street lamp and said, "People think the world ends with explosions. It doesn't. It ends when we forget what's sacred." I didn't know what that meant, but I nodded anyway, uneasy. By October, he had pinned a massive map to his wall dots, marking burned churches across Europe, connected with red thread like some twisted pilgrimage route. I joked about it being serial killer decor, but he only smiled and said, "Some things need to burn before they can be rebuilt." I should have taken that seriously. I really should have. By winter break, most freshmen at Ridgewater were figuring out who they wanted to become. Miles, however, seemed to be shedding who he'd been. His hair grew long and matted. He stopped showering regularly, muttering that cleansing the body was a lie invented by corporations. He barely went to class. He disappeared for hours, sometimes whole nights, into the woods behind campus. I asked him once, "Dude, what are you even doing out there?" He looked at me, eyes glassy, voice almost reverent. "Listening," he said. "The forest still remembers." The more Ash Chapel he listened to, the more he talked about their lead singer, the one arrested years ago for burning down a church in Finland. Fans treated the incident as if it were a holy text, calling it the purification. But Miles talked about him like a prophet. People called him unstable, he said one night while we sat under the flickering dorm hallway light. But prophets always sound insane to the deaf. That set off alarms in my head, but I didn't know how to confront him. He was my friend, or at least the first real friend I'd made away from home. I told myself he was going through a phase, that he'd snap out of it once classes got overwhelming. Except he didn't. Around February, he invited me to what he called a listening session in his room. When I walked in, the lights were off. Only the glow from the map on his wall lit the space. Burned church ruins, red yarn lines, circled towns like he was waiting for something to happen at each of them. "Sit," he said. I did, mostly because the air between us felt fragile. He played an Ash Chapel track I hadn't heard before, long stretches of distorted chanting, almost like people praying backward. When it ended, he stared at me, waiting. "Well?" he said. I shrugged, creepy, but it's just music. "No," he whispered. "It's a call." I should have walked out then. Instead, I pretended everything was fine, the way you do with a friend who's changing in ways you don't understand. But when my roommate moved out mid-semester because Miles had started standing outside his door at night, whispering lyrics, I realized things weren't just strange, they were wrong. Still, nothing prepared me for what happened in the woods. It was early April when Miles knocked on my door and said, "Tonight's important. You need to come with me." Normally I would have refused, but there was something in his voice, urgent, shaky, that made me uneasy. I told myself I'd go for an hour and head back before midnight, just long enough to make sure he wasn't doing anything dangerous. We walked into the woods behind campus, deeper than I'd ever gone. The air grew colder, the trees thicker. My phone lost service. Every instinct told me to turn around. "Where are we even going?" I asked. "To a gathering," he said. "A real one. Not like those fake concerts." He pushed through a curtain of branches until we stepped into a clearing with a decrepit shack leaning sideways like it was ready to collapse. A small group stood around it, faces hidden behind soot-smeared masks. No music, no bonfire, just silence. I whispered, "Miles, who are these people?" He smiled like a proud parent. "Devotees." Before I could ask anything else, two masked figures dragged someone out of the shack, a terrified freshman I recognized from my econ class. His hands were tied. His voice broke as he begged, "Please, let me go. Please." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a ritual. This was something else, something dangerous. One of the masked figures handed Miles a torch. He turned to me and whispered, "Tonight we purify the weak, like our founder did, like we're meant to." I backed away. "No, Miles, this is insane." He stepped closer, torch extended. "Prove your devotion." I ran. Branches whipped my face, roots caught my feet. I heard them behind me, dozens of footsteps, masked breathing, whispers sounding like warped prayers. Let him burn. Purify the weak. Return him to ash. I sprinted until my lungs felt like fire, but they kept coming. I didn't stop until the first rays of dawn hit the treetops. By then, their voices had faded into the woods, swallowed by daylight. I made it back to campus barefoot, bleeding, shaking so hard I couldn't speak. I didn't go to the police. I didn't tell anyone. I was 18, terrified, and convinced nobody would believe a story about masked cult members in the woods. But the nightmare was far from over. For days after, I avoided the woods completely. I skipped classes. I slept with the dorm door locked and a chair jammed under the handle. Every shadow felt like someone watching. Every passing footstep sounded like masked breathing. I kept expecting Miles to show up, but he didn't. Not that week, not the next. 2 weeks later, the campus lit up with police cars. Rumors shot through the dorms like wildfire. Someone had burned down the shack deep in the woods. Firefighters found a body inside. I knew before anyone said it. It was one of them. Or maybe it was the freshman they dragged out. The police never released the name. They kept saying, "Unidentified male, likely accidental." But I knew better. That shack had been part of something awful. Something that wasn't meant to be found. The worst part? Miles' side of the dorm had been cleared out overnight. Clothes gone, posters gone, map gone, like he'd never existed. The RA said his parents had withdrawn him for medical reasons, but when I tried calling his number, it was disconnected. He was gone, vanished without explanation. I lay awake for nights wondering if he burned the shack himself, or if the others turned on him. Eventually, I packed my things and dropped out. I didn't tell my professors. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I got in my car and drove, until the campus disappeared behind hills and trees. For years afterward, every bonfire smell made my hands shake, every industrial metal beat made my stomach twist. And every night, when the house settled and pipes groaned, I swore I could hear distant chanting those same backward prayers. I tried therapy. I tried ignoring it. I tried convincing myself it had been an overreaction brought on by stress and fear. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been one choice away from becoming ash in that shack. Years passed. I built a new life across the country, new apartment, new job, new friends. Nobody knew about Ridgewater, the shack, or the torch Miles handed me in the dark. I told people I left college because of financial issues, easier than the truth. But every so often, something pulled me back. A news article about a burned church, a missing student rumor on an obscure forum, a message board thread discussing Ash Chapel's hidden gatherings. Each time, I felt my heartbeat spike, memories flickering like flames. One night in 2016, while scrolling through a music forum, I came across a post titled, "Whatever Happened to the Ridgewater Chapter?" My hands trembled as I clicked. Most comments were nonsense teenagers romanticizing danger, but one reply froze me. The one who ran was lucky, the others stayed loyal. Purification requires sacrifice. No username, no profile picture, just posted at 3:14 a.m. I told myself it was trolling, just some internet edgelord. But the phrasing, the cadence felt too familiar, too close to what Miles used to say. I shut the laptop and sat there for hours, staring at the wall. Some nights now, I still dream of that clearing, the masks, the torch, the whispering voices slipping between the trees like smoke. I don't know what happened to Miles. I don't want to know. But sometimes I catch myself wondering if he's out there still, hiding in someone else's woods, waiting for another freshman to mistake obsession for identity. Because the truth is, cults aren't always big, loud, or famous. Sometimes they start with a friend offering you a burned CD in a dorm hallway. And sometimes they end with a shack burning in the middle of the night while the rest of the world sleeps peacefully. I survived by running. And I've been running ever since. Blind devotion, whether to a person, a band, or an ideology, can turn dangerous when it replaces your own judgment. Trust your instincts, keep healthy boundaries, and remember, real friends don't ask you to cross lines that cost you your humanity.